Then ask him the next question. That how did our universe come into existence? So the atheist will tell us that initially there was a primary nebula. Then there was a big bang. There was a secondary separation which gave rise to galaxies, the sun, the moon, and the earth on which we live. This we call as a big bang. When did you come to know about this creation of the universe? So he will tell you, about 30-40 years back, the scientists that discovered this. You ask him the question, but what you're talking about the Big Bang is already mentioned in the Quran, in Surah Anbiya, chapter number 21, verse number 30, which says, أَوَلَمْ يَرَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا. Do not the unbelievers see, أَنَّ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضَ كَانَتْ رَتْقًا فَتَقْنَاهُمَا, that the heavens and the earth were joined together and we clove them asunder. What you're talking about the Big Bang is already mentioned in the Quran 1400 years ago. Who could have mentioned that? So the atheist will say, maybe it's a fluke. No problem. Don't argue with him. You continue.
No, I wouldn't say it was a fluke at all. I would tell you that you are either being dishonest in your preaching or you don't understand the scientific theory of the Big Bang. See, the verse you quoted is saying the earth and the heavens were together and then separated. Since the earth only began existing 9 billion years after the Big Bang, your verse is clearly not referring to the Big Bang. A more sensible explanation of the origin of that verse is that Islam borrowed mythology from the ancient religion of the Sumerians. In that faith, the heavens and the earth were together, but then separated by a god named Enlil. Incidentally, this Enlil god also ordered a global flood when he was fed up with humans. Okay, Dr. Naik, what other scientific miracle do you have from the Quran?
The light of the moon, is it its own light or reflected light? So the atheist will tell us that previously we thought the moon has its own light. Recently we have come to know in science, recently means 100 years back, 200 years back, we have come to know that the light of the moon is not its own light but a reflected light. The Quran mentions 1400 years ago in Surah Furqan, chapter number 25, verse number 61, that blessed is he who had placed the constellation in the sky and placed therein a lamp, a sun, having its own light, and moon having reflected light or borrowed light. The Arabic word used for moonlight in the Quran is munir or nur, meaning reflected light or borrowed light. Who could have mentioned in the Quran 1400 years ago that the light of the moon is not its own light but reflected light, which we have come to know recently? The atheist may say, your Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, maybe he was an intelligent man. Don't argue with him. Continue.
Okay, I'm beginning to notice a pattern here. You are clearly lying once again. You claim no one knew the moon's light was reflected back then. Well, Aristarchus of Samos knew the moon was reflecting the sun's light nearly 1,000 years before Muhammad was even born. So this is not information we have only known for 100 or 200 years as you claim. But I'm not going to be too tough on you for being ignorant of scientific history when speaking about the subject. Moving on to your claim that this is mentioned in the Quran, again, it's not mentioned in the Quran. I can't believe you have the nerve to pretend that the word nur in Arabic means reflected light or borrowed light. It most certainly does not. Nur means light, plain and simple. The word nur or munir appears 39 times in the Quran, and I list all references in the description below. I challenge anyone to find a verse using the word nur to clearly mean reflected light. Nowhere at all does it appear to be talking about reflected light. Let's read a couple of verses with the word nur in them and see whether your definition of the word makes sense. Allah is the guardian of those who believe. He brings them out of the darkness into the reflected light. They desire to put out the reflected light of Allah with their mouths. Allah is the reflected light of the heavens and the earth. Chapter 24 in the Quran is also called Surah An-Nur. Show me any Quran which calls this chapter the chapter of reflected light. On top of all that, we have this verse in Surah Al-Qiyamah, chapter 75, verse 8, telling us the moon will lose its own light on Judgment Day. I've looked at all the major Sunni exegeses, Ibn Kathir, Jalalain, At-Tabari, and Tanwir al-Nukhbas, and all of them say clearly that the moon has its own light extinguished. No reference at all to reflected light.
The world that we live on, what's the shape of this earth on which we live? The atheist will tell you it is spherical. When did we come to know? So he will tell us, it was 1597 when Sir Francis Drake, when he sailed around the earth, that he proved that the earth was spherical. But the Quran says 1400 years ago, in Surah Naziyat, chapter number 79, verse number 30. Wal arda ba'da zalika dahaha. And thereafter, we have made the earth egg-shaped. The Arabic word dahaha, one of its meaning is the earth is an expanse. The other meaning is derived from the Arabic word duya, which means an egg. And it doesn't refer to a normal egg. It refers to the egg of an ostrich. And we know the world is not completely round like a ball, but it is geospherical in shape. It is starting from the pole. And if you analyze the shape of the egg of an ostrich, that too is geospherical in shape. Who could have mentioned 1400 years ago that the shape of the earth is geospherical? Again, the atheist may say, your prophet, maybe he was super intelligent. Don't argue with him. You can continue.
Once again, you are way off with historical dates of discovery. Our friend Aristarchus of Samos knew the earth was spherical nearly 1,000 years before Muhammad was born, but he wasn't the first. Aristotle knew earth's shape before him, and there are indications that Pythagoras, who died over 1,000 years before Muhammad existed, was the first to understand the earth's shape. Aristarchus observed the earth's shape by looking at a number of lunar eclipses and seeing earth's round shadow cast onto the moon's surface. But another Greek scientist, Eratosthenes, who lived about 850 years before Muhammad existed, not only knew the earth was spherical, but measured the circumference of the earth using the sun's shadow at noon in 2 nearby Egyptian cities, and then calculated the distance between them. He was accurate to the true figure we know today to roughly 1%, which is astonishing. I'd say that is far more impressive than someone 800 years later saying it was egg-shaped. But again, did Muhammad actually say the earth was egg-shaped, or is Dr. Naik making up the Arabic language as he goes along? Well, the Quran clearly states the earth is flat, like a carpet, or a wide expanse, in 18 Quranic verses. Zakir Naik ignores all these verses, then goes to one verse where he claims there may be 2 meanings for the word, and one of them is ostrich egg. Let's see if the haha actually means what Zakir Naik claims. Al-Tabari's exegesis, one of the most thorough in Islamic history, cites 18 different hadiths relating to an explanation of the verse. Not a single hadith says it means the earth is spherical. If you actually understood Arabic, you'll know dahaha means extending. It isn't even the name for an ostrich egg. The only reason it's mildly associated is because an ostrich produces an expanse with a small bit of the ground where it lays its eggs. So even with this meaning, the word is referring to the place where an ostrich egg is laid and has nothing to do with the egg itself.
When I was in school, I had learned that the sun was stationary. It revolved but did not rotate about its own axis.
You learned the sun revolved and did not rotate around its own axis? Well, Galileo discovered the sun rotates around its own axis in the 1600s, so you definitely went to a bad school. I think that kind of explains a lot.
So the atheists will say, is that mentioned in the Quran? I say, no, that is what I learned in school. When I passed my school in 1982, approximately 12 years back, I had learned the sun was stationary, did not rotate about its own axis. But the Quran says in Surah Anbiya, chapter number 21, verse number 33, Huwa allazi khalaqa al-layla wan-nahara. It is Allah who has created the night and the day. Wash-shamsa wal-qamar, the sun and the moon. Kullun fi falaki yasbahun, each one traveling in orbit with its own motion. So the Quran says that besides the sun revolving, it even rotates about its own axis. Who could have mentioned this in the Quran 1400 years ago? And the atheist will be silent. There will be a long pause. Don't wait for the reply. You can keep on continuing.
The verse you just cited makes absolutely no mention of the sun spinning on its own axis. Not a single exegesis in Islam makes this claim either. The Quran is clearly geocentric. Idiotic, yet honest clerics who don't try to change the meaning of verses in the Quran agree.
Allah يقول والشمس تجري لمستقر لها ذلك تقدير العزيز العليم. فالمؤمن يؤمن بما دل القرآن عليه ويصدق بذلك ويدع التعمق والتكلف، فالنص القرآن صريح في جريانها كما أخبر الشمس تجري لمستقر لها، فيؤمن بالقرآن ويصدق به ولا يلتفت إلى سواه.
في الآية الكريمة يقول استفسر عن هذه الآية والشمس تجري لمستقر لها ذلك تقدير العزيز العليم. هل الشمس تدور حول الأرض؟
بلا شك هذا هو ما دل عليه القرآن. والشمس تجري، هم يقولون لا الشمس واقفة والأرض هي اللي تجري، هذا عكس ما جاء في القرآن. وإبراهيم عليه السلام قال للنمرود إن الله يأتي بالشمس من المشرق فأتي بها من المغرب، فبهت الذي كفر. فكوننا نترك ما دل عليه القرآن ونأخذ بالنظريات الحديثة هذا لا يكون من المسلم، ويجب على المسلم أن يتبع القرآن.
Today, science tells us that the universe is expanding, which is mentioned in the Quran 1400 years ago in Surah Dhariyat, chapter number 51, verse number 47.
Here, Zakir Naik is actually right. He's honest. No, I'm just kidding. The way he makes this claim is by changing the Arabic word in the Quran to mean something entirely different to the original. This is evident once again if you look at all translations pre-1920s and when Hubble and science made this discovery, and not the Muslims for some reason, which would be a surprise if they genuinely had this verse in their book to give them such a big clue. However, what occurs here is a subtle change to the Arabic word musi'un into muwassi'un. The original says God created the heavens and he is surely capable of doing so. When it's changed, it can mean wide expanse or extending. It's a subtle change to the original word, but conveniently changes its meaning to try and deceive.
The Quran speaks about the water cycle which we learnt in school. It was Soban and Palissy in 1580 who first described the water cycle, how the water evaporates from the ocean, forms into clouds, moves into the interior, falls down as rain. This water cycle is spoken about in great detail in the Quran in several verses. In Surah Az-Zumur, chapter 39, verse 21. In Surah Rum, chapter number 30, verse 24. In Surah Hijr, chapter 15, verse 22. In Surah Mu'minun, chapter number 23, verse number 18. In Surah Nur, chapter number 24, verse number 43. In Surah Rum, chapter number 30, verse 48. In Surah Araf, chapter number 7, verse number 17. In Surah Furqan, chapter number 25, verse 48 to 49. In Surah Fatir, chapter number 35, verse number 9. In Surah Yasin, chapter number 36, verse number 34. In Surah Mulk, chapter number 67, verse number 30. In Surah Tariq, chapter number 86, verse number 11. There are hundreds of verses in the Quran which only speak about the water cycle which science has discovered recently.
In case those verses were too quick, let's just check a couple of them out. One here seems entirely irrelevant to water altogether. It doesn't actually mention anything related to water. And this one here is probably the most detailed out of the bunch. As you can see, it's certainly not miraculous knowledge. The ancient Greeks knew a lot more about the water cycle, and even the Bible has verses that are more accurate, like this one.